Chapter 3. She appeared to be running until the breath ran out of her. Except she was not losing wind. Her bare footsteps sounded like that of a wild stallion charging across the open plain. Part of her screamed for her to stop realizing how fast she was actually moving, that what she was doing, what she had been doing, was inhuman and unnatural. By right, medically speaking, her heart should have popped several hundred miles ago, and her leg muscles should have torn off her bones. The exact opposite was happening as she clocked speeds of almost 70, possibly 80 miles an hour, with a heartbeat as if she was taking a leisure walk while her muscles did not even cramp. Fear was the rider that kept her moving. Images of what happened at Mountain View flashed before her eyes, forcing her to move faster and faster. She had to get as far as her legs could carry her so that she could sort out what was happening. What she did not realize was at her current speed, she had gone extremely far. Her tattered, bloodied, bullet-riddled clothes felt like they were going to be torn from her body. It was then that things also got blurry. Superhuman speed did not translate to superhuman eyesight, which would have allowed her to see in order to maneuver at such breakneck speeds as she charged into a wooden area. Logic would dictate stopping at this point, but Sophia, trying her best to maneuver around the trees, was not even sure she knew how to stop. Not that she really needed to, as she clipped and smashed through any and everything getting in her path. "Oh, shit!" she yelled. The mammoth oak tree had probably a century on it within those woods. Its trunk was clearly 6 times the width of Sophia's body. Age gave it the strength and destiny close to steel, making it strong enough to stop anything made of fiberglass, and even some things made of pure steel itself. Sophia, barreling through, obliterated a huge portion of the trunk on impact, sending chunks and splinters flying everywhere. She would have been fine if she did not trip over what was left of the trunk, sending her into an awkward roll, tumbling down an embankment, destroying all in her path, whether it be wood or stone. What was left of the tree could not support its weight any longer, as it burst in half and fell to earth with a ground-shaking thud. Sophia screamed and cursed as she tumbled down the steep embankment, falling in ways that should have snapped her neck or split her skull open. She screamed again as the deadly roll flung her off a cliff at the bottom of the embankment, falling a good 50 feet, hitting the river down below hard, like a 2-ton Mack truck. Minutes went by as she finally got her bearing underwater and battled against the currents to come up. Her new powerful lungs kept her from drowning as she emerged. Her gag reflexes made her throw up half of the river she took in while going under. As she finally made her way to the shoreline, she continued to puke up what was left of the water in her lungs. She was still human, she thought to herself. That, and the fact that her heart was still beating in her chest, meant she was not the walking dead. Sophia instinctively checked herself to make sure she did not break a bone, only to find that despite the life-ending tumble she took, there was not a scratch on her. She looked around in wonderment, as if the morning sun shined down on her. The realization of what happened several hours ago caused her to emit a nervous laugh mixed with sobbing tears as she clutched her chest. Several hours ago, the state of Texas had executed her. A couple of hours ago, she was brought down by a hail of bullets. After each death, she was resurrected stronger than the previous time, giving her the ability to physically break out of prison, fighting through a brigade of heavily armed and highly trained correctional officers, police, and from what she could tell, a SWAT team. 4 years ago, she was sure she would never see outside of those walls alive. And there she stood on a riverbank, free underneath God's blue sky. Painfully, she remembered why she was there. Distorted images, memories she had no knowledge of, flashed before her eyes. Pieces of an obvious puzzle hidden from her for years. Sophia grabbed her skull, trying to sort through the visions. It was then she realized that around her wrists were the restraints from the lethal injection table. She went to unbuckle the wrist restraint on her right wrist when she was hit with the vision of being on the lethal injection table, going to sleep, feeling herself suffocating and dying, despite the assumption that lethal injection was the most humane and peaceful way to be executed before everything went dark. She could feel her lungs filling with air again, more distorted memories flooding her mind. The skull-cracking strike of the baton, bullets ripping into her body, and choking on her own blood before the piercing pain of a bullet penetrating her skull, destroying her brain, sending her into the black for a second time. She did not know how long she was in the black, until air violently rushed into her lungs again. Her heart felt as if it was going to beat out of her chest, while all of her veins felt as if they were on fire. The last pain she felt before escaping Mountain View would be what felt like another bullet striking the back of her skull. She quickly ripped both restraints from her wrists like paper, throwing them as far away as possible. She crouched down in the freezing cold water of the river, trying to get it together. It was terrifying. She literally felt everything all over again, except she was not dying. She gripped a nearby stone that was about 4 times her size, not realizing her hands were imprinting into the wet stone. She began to count backwards to herself from 20, taking a deep breath while focusing on the stone. Slowly the visions disappeared, and she could see straight again. "It's not real. It's not real. You're alive. You are alive," she reaffirmed to herself. She submerged herself into the river to shock her system with the ice-cold water. She could still feel cold and wetness, although it was not the teeth-chattering hypothermia cold felt after dunked into a surging river. It meant her nerves were still intact. Not that it mattered, since the heat from the Texas sun would dry her off once she started moving again. She rose back to a standing position with her senses clearer and more focused. Slowly, she looked around in bewilderment, pondering the most obvious question since coming to a stop at the riverbank. "Where the hell am I?" she asked aloud. Chapter 4. Gatesville Women's Unit of the prison was designated for regular prisoners and lifers as opposed to Mountain View, which was strictly for death row inmates. Agents Armitage and Mercer sat in the interrogation room, going through the files and pictures they had on Sophia, attempting to piece things together when the door opened. The silver dreadlock-haired woman Sophia had said her final goodbyes to walked through in shackles, flanked by 2 correctional officers. She had a slight permanent limp to her walk in her right leg due to a prison altercation some years ago. Armitage looked up while Mercer continued to go through the files. "Shackles aren't necessary, boys. You can take them off," Mark requested. As they moved the restraints from her wrists, ankles, and waist, she stood taller and more distinguished. Armitage motioned for her to take a seat, which she did as the correctional officers took their leave waiting outside. Mark picked up her file, quickly scanning it. Agnes Sharif Wilcox, also known as Sister Sharif, he began to read. Head of the Sisters of Islam, convicted of murder and sentenced to 40 years to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 20. My name is Special Agent Mark Armitage, and this is my partner, Special Agent Dustin Mercer. "How can I help you, Special Agent?" Sister Sharif got down to the point. Mark took out a photo of Sophia, sliding it in front of her. "Do you know this woman?" "Her name is Sophia Dennison." She glanced at the picture. "She was murdered a couple of hours ago." Dustin scoffed. Sister Sharif narrowed her eyes at Mercer, who shot her back a dirty look. Mark spun around the laptop on the table to face her. He fumbled a bit to bring up the video function. "We'd like you to watch something," he requested. "The footage you're about to see is a bit disturbing, but we ask that you please watch." As the video played, Sister Sharif's chiseled expression quickly softened at the footage of her friend lying lifeless on the execution table. As she swatted away the tears, 20 years was scared out of her, witnessing the supposed dead corpse of her friend rising back to life, gasping for air. "Jesus," uttered a now shaken Sister Sharif. Dustin gave her a sarcastic, perplexed look. "Thought you prayed to Muhammad," he snorted. She ignored Mercer's snide remark as she watched her friend rip through her restraints and overpower 5 correctional officers, punching one through 2 inches of solid glass. She then cringed, letting out a yelp as she watched her friend savagely gunned down on screen. "Sophie," whimpered Sister Sharif, bearing witness to Sophia's bloodied and bullet-riddled body as she lay dead for a second time. A stone-faced Armitage with full knowledge of the end story walked up to fast-forward the video. "Keep watching, please," he requested. Sister Sharif gave him a quick look of disgust until she glanced at the speeding footage, seeing what they saw a couple of hours ago. Armitage stopped the video just before the second resurrection. It took another 20 years for her. She watched in horror as what used to be her friend rose once more, now impervious to gunfire, and proceeded to tear through a hallway stuffed with correctional officers, local police, and SWAT. Armitage allowed her to listen to the screams and yells, along with the background sounds of smashed concrete and bending steel, before shutting the video off. Sister Sharif lowered her head, attempting not to appear shaken after absorbing everything she had seen. "If you're expecting that doofy-looking white kid from that '70s show to come running out and tell you you've just been punked, he's not," came Dustin out of left field, throwing a zing. Sister Sharif tried her best to compose herself as she raised her head, looking Armitage in the eyes. "What do you want from me?" she demanded to know. Aside from her attorney, during the almost 4 years Ms. Dennison has been here, she has not had contact with family or friends in any shape or form. Mark started off his interview. No phone calls, personal visits, email. She refused all mail that had been sent to her. The only people she's had contact with during that time are the people in this prison, and I have it on good knowledge that you and her became bosom buddies during that whole time. "And?" she shrugged. "Yes, we were friends. Good friends. Sisters. But if you want to know if I knew she was stronger than a friggin' locomotive, leaping tall buildings with a single bound, no, I did not know that. Nor did she display that ability in the 4 years she was here. I don't know what that is, but that is not the Sophia I knew." "We're wasting our frickin' time." Dustin buried his head in his tree-trunk arms, muttering. Mark moved closer to Sister Sharif, sitting on the edge of the table, looking down at her. "Ms. Sharif, let's put aside the unexplainable insanity that has happened in the last couple of hours," he said, attempting to reason with her. "The reality of the situation is your friend seriously injured several people in her escape, men and women with families. She even murdered one." He hoped his song and dance would get her to open up and give him a shred of clue or idea as to what happened in Mountain View. "Who did she kill?" Sister Sharif scoffed. She leaned back in her seat, folding her arms, with the knowledge that the Sophia she knew would never hurt a tick, much less another human being. "Officer Dennis Wilford, husband, father of—" began Mark with his violin speech. Sister Sharif shot up in her seat, holding a hand up, halting him before he could finish his tune. "She killed Big Buck?" Her eyes widened. Before Armitage could answer her, Sister Sharif hunched over, emitting a cackling noise. It grew louder as she stomped her feet with apparent joy. Her full-blown hysterical laughter royally pissed off Dustin. "You think this shit is funny, convict?" He sprung to his feet, violently slamming his fist on the table. "How about I—" "What exactly do you think you can do to me, FBI man?" Sister Sharif snapped back at Mercer, looking dead at him. She knew there was not a thing Mercer or anyone could do to her, as her mind wandered back to how she became a resident of Gatesville Women's Facility.
This is the end of the CD. The audiobook continues on the next CD.